All right. Hello, this is Griff, and I'm glad that you guys were able to join us. We talked a little bit yesterday about how exciting today is going to be because, oh, wait, I'll build up to it. First of all, let me just show you guys where I'm at. So this is the beautiful, beautiful old growth redwood forest, and there's only 4.6% of it left. So we are definitely thankful for the people who saved it, okay? Because we have 4.6%. And we're going to talk about some of those people today. So hello for those of you joining us. This is part of the centennial anniversary Humboldt Redwoods State Park speaker series, because 1921, this park was dedicated to the people of California and the world, and it still exists today. And there's a lot of players that participated in the preservation of it. Before this was a park, for thousands of years, this was the homeland and still is the homeland of the Sinkyone people. And they did a wonderful job of keeping this beauty intact. And so we are very, very grateful to be here and to celebrate this park. And you know, a lot of people went into saving the last 4.6%, but not all their stories are told. And there's a saying that history is told by the victors. I would like to clarify that a little bit more and say, history was told by the people who were allowed to tell it. They weren't always the victors, but they were very often people who looked like me. And so now we're getting the benefit of hearing a bunch of histories. And so together with our collective histories, we're getting a much, much more interesting, much, much more helpful worldview about where we came from, where we're at, and where we're going. And one of my very, very favorite stories is the story we're going to hear today. So Laura and James Wasserman, let me introduce the people I'm interviewing right now, and I'm going to read this so I don't mess it up. You guys probably like, but it'd be so much more interesting if you did mess it up, but I'm not going to because I'm going to read it. So Laura Wasserman and her husband, James Wasserman, wrote a book called Who Saved the Redwoods? And I think this will probably be in mirror form. So I'll just read it to you. Who Saved the Redwoods? The Unsung Heroines of the 1920s who fought for our redwood forest and helped save them. So Laura is a longtime institutional research coordinator in the private and public sectors of California and Alaska, specializing in social and environmental research. James Wasserman is a longtime newspaper journalist and state government policy analyst in California and Alaska. His specialties include land use and the environment. You guys sound well qualified to write a book called Who Saved the Redwoods? So what I would love to start is if you guys could just say hi to everybody first. And I would love for you guys, because I'm just going to tell you guys, their into loving this story is very similar to mine. And it has a lot to do with this woman right here. This is Laura Mahan, who I don't have any tattoos, but I often tell people that if I was to get a tattoo, it would be of her somewhere here. And it's also your guys' kind of entry into this. So can you introduce yourselves and tell us why we love Laura Mahan so much?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for having us on the show. We're really happy to be here and wish Humboldt Redwoods State Park a really happy 100th birthday. So we're thrilled to be here.
Cheers.
Yeah. And, you know, as far as Laura Mahan, this is great because we both agree this is just an epic saga that happened in November of 1924. And we call it the showdown in the forest. And really it was this is the famed story of Laura Mahan and a Pacific lumber logging crew. And the story really has just become mythic in early redwoods history, which we just love. Laura, then a 56-year-old woman, stood in the path of tree felling and refused to move. Now, there's a great chronicling of this in a 1953 story in the Ferndale Enterprise. And it really recounts the story of Laura and James Mahan and their actions on that, autumn day. It's like, as far as we know, the story is like the Pacific Lumber Company had agreed to delay cutting lumber in Dyerville Flat. But one night a message comes in to Laura and James at home that, they're in there logging secretly. And so in the morning, I love this part of the story, they get in their car and they drive and they park on the fringe of a grove where, the lumbering is happening. And then they get out. And as the story goes, they walk into the forest and they hear noise of workmen. and they're seeing sunlight come in where there should be darkness due to a very dense forest that is no longer there. They're seeing these felled trees laying on the ground, and they ask the
And they're like,
forest,
no.
yeah,
What is
really,
this?
it's like, say, what are you doing? And so
Mhm.
they do go in and they ask the foreman to stop logging. They see the huge trees and the smell of gasoline, so they know that's obviously they've been logging in there. And the foreman said he had his orders and he refused to stop. So here it comes. In desperation, Laura Mahan then steps up on the flat surface of a recently cut stump and refuses to move. She's standing in the path, really, of death if they continue cutting the timber, because it'll fall right where she is. And she stood there and just defied the men to proceed. And eventually they put down their chainsaws and their axes, that they were logging with. And she then turns to her husband, James, who then rushes off to Eureka to get an attorney, and he rushes off to get a temporary restraining order. And they also go to the newspapers, who are just, furious that the company is cutting trees in an area that the locals really want to save. And actually, those were the last trees cut in that forest.
Yeah, it's interesting because her actions really reverberated outward. That set in motion a chain of events that over the next few years managed to save like 13,000 acres in Humboldt Redwoods State Park. I mean, within days of her standing on that stump, the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to condemn Pacific Lumber property there in Dyerville Flat and turn it into a public park. And that set off a whole bunch of lawsuits and counter lawsuits and public hearings. And that wrangling went on for 3 months until the Save the Redwoods League was able to get $1 million from the Rockefeller fortune to buy all of that land. And that just made such a difference. The bottom line, her defiance that day sort of ended the day when lumber companies had complete say over what happened in the forests. And all that's commemorated in that plaque that we talked about earlier, or on the side of the road there by the Avenue of the Giants, and the Mahan Grove, which was established in 1938 by the State Park Commission.
It's fascinating, the blow by blow, on so many different levels that happened during that time to protect these woods. But, this is Humboldt County. And so a lot of people know, Humboldt County is synonymous with a lot of things, few things mainly when we think about Humboldt, you know what I'm saying? But forest activism, a lot of forest activism has come out of this county. And so like even in the 1920s, you had people who were doing civil disobedience in order to protect trees. And that's kind of a culture that continued in this county in Northern California for a century afterwards. So it's interesting. Laura Mahan is Laura Mahan is like, the ideological great grandmother of a lot of other forest activists.
She is, and just a quick note as to who she was. This is a woman who was the daughter of pioneers who came west in covered wagons from like Illinois and Michigan. She attended Mills College and then art school in San Francisco. And she also headed the 800-member women's Humboldt County Women's Save the Redwoods League and was really active in the Federation of Women's Clubs, California Federation. And we like to think really that she was the face of the Humboldt County Redwoods battle for years, just like you were saying, Griff, that, this went on for a long time. And, as you can tell from these stories, this was a woman who would not accept no for an answer. And
what a perfect time to celebrate these women, because in case I didn't say in the intro, this is Women's History Month. And when we think of women's history, there's a lot of like go-to stories. And I really want this story to be one of the go-to stories. Women organizing themselves shortly after they had the right to vote to preserve that which is sacred in my perspective, but like this inheritance of this ecological treasure. And I think that the redwoods in and of themselves are kind of like an icon for celebrating Women's History Month, because you can't really look at what's left of the redwoods and not think about women's history, because that's the reason why we have this forest that I'm standing in, largely is because of their efforts. And that's why I love the fact you guys wrote this book. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions because there's so much I want to ask you, and we have a short amount of time, so we're going to move through these questions, and then we're going to tell people how they could learn more, by purchasing your book, but also just by participating in future centennial anniversary events that the Humboldt Redwood State Parks is going to do. So you kind of letting us know why you wrote the book, and how it started. If you guys could tell us that, but at the same time, I want to ask you, was a catalyst for writing this book also part of like trying to bring some equity, some social justice to a story that may have been put in the closet because it wasn't full of white male characters?
Well, I give a tribute here to my great co-author here, Laura, because Laura felt strongly that that we should write this book to give credit where credit is due, and also to write these women back into history, because so much of what they had done has been overlooked, and it's been part of a larger narrative of a few powerful men doing all the heavy lifting, and so that's what we got into this basically by being tourists. 6 years ago we were driving the Avenue of the Giants, and we came across that Mahan plaque by the side of the road, and we walked back into the grove, and we just immediately fell in love with the redwoods. But when we saw that sign about what happened that day, we thought that must be part of a much bigger story.
Yeah.
And it sure was. So we started pulling on the threads of that, a little when we got home, and it led us into this world of early 1900s women's clubs with forestry, surprisingly, at the very top of their agenda. And we soon discovered all these thousands of women statewide in these clubs who saw the destructions of the redwoods and said enough. And we still can't believe that story wasn't taken, because the story is so dramatic and colorful. It's often about being a jump ahead of the chainsaws, and trying to save those trees. And it has all these powerful themes of corporate capital and jobs and the economy versus beauty and inspiration, and an almost spiritual need for these places to be preserved for humanity to walk inside. And and that's not even to mention the angle of the women.
What's really difficult for me as like a Californian who, like, the most prominent figures in my life have always been female, especially my mother and my grandmother. And it's hard for me to put myself in this relatively recent, historically speaking, time of where women weren't allowed to vote or speak out on anything that affects the economy. And when you said that they made forestry their, one of their two, I think it was, education and forestry for the Women's Federation of California, to make forestry like one of their things we're going to talk about, is like the significance of that can't be understated. And maybe I got this from your book or some other research, but like, women were allowed to have garden clubs. So you can have garden clubs and tea clubs and do some ladylike things. And how they took that gardening and didn't see a separation between like urban and suburban gardening, but also forestry, and how they saw this like continuity there. And so we're able to feel confident enough to speak out on forestry issues. I love that. And I feel like they knew that, and then we kind of forgot that for a century and had a delineation between, a separation between like in-town gardening and out of town is forestry. But really, now that we're learning about like how pollinators need native plants and how native plants are really helpful to birds, we're kind of bringing that back and seeing that gardening, having a relationship with the forest, is same as having a relationship with even just the space around our house. And I love that. I'm sorry, I just went on a little bit of a tangent, but
take that a little step further here. It's like, there were a lot of books about the Redwood Wars in the 60s, the 70s, and the 90s, but there really wasn't anything comprehensive in one spot about the 20s and the 30s and how really this modern environmental movement got started. There were pieces of it all over the place, but we had to really research hard and find them to pull all the pieces together into one coherent story, and it's just really portrays the role and the significance and the leadership of women, you know, during that time period, and how the women's clubs, as you were talking, Griff, you know, the progressive era really helped these women to get outside the home and the garden, and now they could have a voice in politics. The vote came in 1911, although some of the clubs were very active by 1900, which I found just really amazing. You know, and it just, all the clubs would be lobbying politicians, raising money, and really, you know, on a local level, then a statewide level, and then a national level, you know, really promoting the plight of the redwoods. And this really helped with the momentum of the entire, you know, movement. It was really something. And one of their main philosophies was the ideals of the world shouldn't be destroyed and be preserved for future generations. They were really adamant about that, let alone the destruction of, you know, the environment right around them.
Yeah, that future generations is always interesting, because that's us. You know, that's every one of us who's ever hiked the Redwood Trail. You know, that they did that for us.
Yeah, and that's a great segue for my next question, because a lot of times, you know, especially since we've all been kind of fed this one perspective of history, it's been really difficult for a lot of us to think of that history as being relevant to us. And because, like, maybe our people, or, you know, our perspective wasn't included in the recording of the other history. So let's just like awaken this history a little bit and make it relevant to people who are watching right now, people who are living right now. And so the women's group, all these women, that there were several different women, it wasn't just Laura Mahan, but if you could connect them to modern conservationists today, like say Greta Thunberg, Judy Baris, Julia Butterfly Hill, who would those women be, and why are you connecting them like that?
Well, you know, I can do that. I'll take Greta Thunberg here. We thought about this, and I have two women that I think really could be ideological grandmothers. You know, as Greta started in high school with her, you know, climate endangerment, she would like leave school and go stand outside the Swedish Parliament, you know, campaigning for action, stronger action on climate control. And she was 15 and in high school. And in our book, we were so fortunate to find and profile Rue Flo Harper Lee, who as a high school senior became just a lifelong Redwoods crusader. But she, as well as Greta, in high school, when she was a senior at the Eureka High School in 1921, she wrote a message in her school yearbook called The Sequoia, urging classmates in the community to not destroy the redwoods, you know. And this was like quite a message. It was like she was really promoting the preservation of these giants, you know, and that it's our rightful duty to protect them. And that,
and she's saying this inside of Eureka, which was like a hub of the timber industry, like a logging town.
Totally. Yeah. A lot of these women were married to you know, their spouses had jobs in the logging and mills. So yeah, this was quite an event. And you know, I should point out that they weren't saying stop all logging. They just wanted it to proceed in a manner that didn't destroy everything.
Mm-hmm.
But,
so remind us the name of that person who's connected to Greta.
Yeah, Rue Flo Harper Lee, the high school senior. And she really was a conservation activist well into her adulthood, and she helped with, you know, leading the Humboldt County activism in the 60s and 70s that helped establish Redwood National Park.
Awesome.
But she started in high school, like Greta.
I think I even saw a picture of her when she was helping that. That's with the Redwood National Park. So who would be the ideological grandmother of Julia Butterfly Hill or Judy Baris?
Oh, wait, I got to go one more though with, I have to do this one with Greta. There's one more great comparison. I'll make it short. Carrie Stevens-Walter, she, like Greta, was, and I have to mention her because she is one of the early visionaries on climate change. She helped founded the Sempervirens Club in 1900. And she really was writing that, if you continue lumbering at this rate, your deforestation of the Santa Cruz Mountains will cause climate change and decrease the rainfall. And this is in 1900. So I just had to make that comparison with Greta. So I will.
That's just amazing that there were people back then that were making those kinds of connections. Alexander von Humboldt did too, but Alexander von Humboldt was a man of extreme privilege. Very wealthy family, access to everything, male, German male. But to have Carrie Stevens like in 1900, that is amazing and so, so inspirational. And I love that.
No,
so
give
us another ideological great grandma.
Well, if you're talking, I'll take Julia Butterfly Hill, and we pair her with Laura Parrott Mahan, big time, because they were 70 years apart, but they both fought the same Pacific Lumber Company, and their actions stirred public imagination and brought a ton of publicity to their causes. And just to refresh everybody, Julia Butterfly Hill sat in a tree for 738 days during the Headwaters Redwood Wars in the late 1990s. And Laura Mahan stood on a stump and forced a Pacific lumber crew to stop in their tracks. But Julia wrote in her book, The Legacy of Luna, about the reverence she felt immediately the first time she was in the Redwoods. And Laura Mahan grew up in the Redwoods, and she had the same reverence. And both of them were motivated by a love of beauty and wild nature, and neither bowed to the prevailing idea that economy and jobs had to come first. And finally, they both possessed amazing, extraordinary sense of what would draw publicity and how to use that in a political realm. And I think they would both admire each other very much if they could meet.
I wonder if Julia Butterfly Hill knows about Laura. If you're on here and you know Julia Butterfly Hill, send her this video and tell her we found her ideological great grandma. We got it.
I wish we knew her.
Yeah, we got it. She'll be thrilled. Laura and Julia Butterfly Hill, I love that connection. Is there any more ideological great grandmothers that we can connect to modern figures you want to mention?
I would say briefly. Everybody knows Rachel Carson. She was in 1962. She published, I'm sorry, what was the name of the book?
Silent Spring.
Silent Spring, thank you. And that was basically a warning against the unregulated use of chemicals in the environment. And there was a couple, if she was alive in the 1920s, she would have been much like a couple of women, Annie Zane Murray from Eureka and Edna Hildebrand Putnam in Oakland. And both of them really had a way with words in the same way that Rachel Carson did. And they were women maneuvering in a man's world like Rachel was. And they faced ridicule. The idea of giving up pesticides and the idea of saving trees was laughable. It would literally get you laughed off the sidewalks in Eureka. And but they stayed with it. And they wrote eloquently. Murray was she wrote a resolution for the Humboldt County Women's Clubs after that 1913 picnic when they all got together for the first time. And it basically said, civilization demands that the natural wonders of the world should be preserved for future generations to study and enjoy. And that resolution got quickly adopted by the San Francisco district of the California Federation of Women's Clubs. And they sent it to Congress, saying, do something because the woodman's axe is busy and it's going to be too late pretty soon. And, Putnam, she was a freelance writer, and she visited the Redwoods in 1919 and was just appalled by some of the destruction that was going on. And she suggested that the Redwoods convey to us today a proper conception of what the world was like when it was very young. I just love that concept. And she also had the theme that you would not tear down the pyramids of Egypt to make paving stones for the streets of Cairo. So why would you tear down these precious wonders to make grape stakes and lumber ties? And
grape stakes. Put grapes on. We could have used all kinds of stuff besides old growth redwood trees.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Really.
So they loved their trees, and they took their licks from the corporate interests that opposed them. But in the end, they saved redwoods and made it a safer world.
One of the one of the things that blows my mind is like how not long ago this was, how very long ago it was. And, you know, as modern humans, we're in this really unique time for many, many, many levels. And one of the ways I think about it is that my great, so my ancestor in the 1400s plowed their field and did all their work very similar to their great grandfather, because in that span of a few hundred years, not a whole lot had changed, like, you know, technologically and culturally. Whereas now each generation is markedly different because of the way the social change, the globalization, the technology. And just 100 years ago in 1921, women were oppressed and suppressed because they had been conditioned to think that they weren't capable of doing so much. And it's interesting how I was in the CCC in the 80s, and the women leadership was relatively new of outdoor, you know, crews and stuff, and how valuable the stories of Laura Mahan and the other women who you talk about in your book, how valuable and empowering those stories would have been for modern female leaders and conservationists and activists, which I think is really important that people read your book, share your book, teachers understand this history, so that a whole new set of people could realize that the strength and the vision and the commitment and the dedication to save natural areas goes back way farther than people may suspect, way farther than Julia Butterfly Hill. Which leads me to my next question. If you could bring back one of these women, if I said this cup and has a potion in it, it will help you bring back any woman from this time of this era of your book in the early 1900s, who would she be, and what do you think she would say if she saw the modern conservation environmental movement?
Well, I'm going to take Clara Burdett, and you know, she was from Los Angeles, and she actually was a co-founder of the California Federation of Women's Clubs in 1900, and her rallying cry was to save the coast redwoods and the giant sequoias. She was aware that there were women's groups all across the country that were saving like monuments and areas like the cliff dwellings of Colorado. There were women's clubs saving them from vandalism. So her plan was to save the ancient forests of California from the destruction of what she called greedy men. So that was just the perceptive that was going on. And one of her great lines is, better one living tree in California than 50 acres of lumber yard, which is kind of what you were talking about with the grape stakes, you know. But I think if she came back today, what she inspired in the early 1900s is really continuing and going on today. You know, although there are many acres of ancient forests that have been destroyed, she would be pleased, I think, that we now have programs in place to, you know, for reforestation. And a big one is the Save the Redwoods League Redwoods Rising program, where they're working to reestablish conditions of the original ancient forest ecosystems. And, you know, one of her philosophies, which I see continuing today, is that her vision, just as, you know, the reforestation and the trying to restore the ecosystems, her vision was to protect and replant. And she said, if you do this, California will be blessed 1,000-fold in natural resources. And I think that point of view is as relevant now as it was then, and as it will be in the future, you know. And I just see a lot of these women as just inspiring stories, and they're actually hidden histories, you know, that these women have been forgotten. So I'm glad we get to bring a few of them back to life today.
I am too. I'm super glad you guys are doing this, and that you guys have done this, and that you have agreed to come on here and talk to me about this, because I really want humans to be here in 15, 20 generations from now and be able to enjoy redwood. But in order old growth redwood forests. But in order to do that, we got to like really look deeply at our culture, what we're doing right now, and what we need to do in the future. And part of that is by shining light on some of these forgotten histories. So thank you very, very much. And if someone wanted to learn more about this subject, where can they find your book?
Well, if you're in Eureka, it's available at the Clark Historical Museum and the Humboldt County Historical Society, and possibly a couple of the bookstores there as well. It's available at Redwood Park Visitor Centers. And if you're not in Humboldt County, it's always there on Amazon, very easy to order.
Awesome. And I just want to, give you guys a chance to close this out. I want to invite people to share this video, especially with the girls and the little girls in your life, because they need to like understand like how the heroes have laid the foundation for them to be the next Lorax, the next speaker of the trees. So also I want to invite all of you, even you men out there, to bring out your inner Laura Mahan and protect what is beautiful, just because it's beautiful. Forget all the ecological connections, which are extremely important. Let's just save things that are, nature and ecology, landscapes, ecological landscapes that are beautiful. So thank you very much. And just, what are your closing comments that you can share with us?
We really are just so grateful to all these women, and in our minds here, this was really a golden era, and as we do say in the book, I think this is really just a time when people throughout California and the nation came together to just have the same belief and vision in saving wild trees, and they did so just wonderfully. So I'm just so happy we could share all of this with everyone. I don't know what you have there.
I go back to my original theme. It's just such a great story. And it's really valuable to learn.
Yeah, we certainly enjoyed learning the story.
Sure
I had no idea.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you, women who are like up there in the old growth forest in the sky. Thank you for saving this beautiful, beautiful park. And thank you all for joining us. Please share this and come enjoy Humboldt Redwood State Park. It's our centennial anniversary, and happy Women's History Month.